My stepsister married my fiancé while I was in the hospital. That was the first sentence I read on my phone when I woke up, sent by a cousin who didn't know how else to warn me. The room smelled like antiseptic and wilted flowers. My phone beeped softly, like it was counting down something I couldn't see. I scrolled in silence. Photos loaded one by one: white dress, his familiar smile, her hand on his chest like it had always belonged there. The caption said family only. I noticed my name missing. By noon, I learned she was 2 months pregnant. By evening, my father stood at the foot of my bed and told me to pack my things when I was discharged. No shouting. No explanations. Just a decision already made. As he turned to leave, he paused and added, almost gently, "They're naming the baby after you." I had always been the quiet one in our house, the agreeable daughter, the reliable stepchild, the woman people forgot to ask but expected to show up. My mother died when I was 17, and after that, I learned quickly how to survive by shrinking. My father remarried within a year. His new wife brought a daughter who laughed loudly, wanted loudly, and was always chosen loudly. I learned the art of stepping aside without being asked. My fiancé said he loved that about me. Said I was easy. Said I didn't make things complicated. I paid half the bills, planned our future, remembered his allergies, his mother's birthday, the small facts that made a life run smoothly. He made promises like habits, without intention behind them. My stepsister treated me like background furniture. Useful, present, invisible. She borrowed my clothes without asking, my makeup without returning it, my fiancé's attention without hiding it very well. When I noticed, I told myself I was being paranoid. That was my flaw. I trusted silence more than instinct. Even in the hospital, no one asked how I was healing. They asked when I'd be discharged, who would sign the papers, where I would go next. I realized then that I had been rehearsed out of my own life long before the wedding happened. People like that don't think they're cruel. They think you won't notice. After I was discharged, I returned to the house to collect what they said was mine. The word sounded generous, like a favor. My stepsister stood in the hallway, one hand resting on her stomach, not showing yet but already performing the role. She didn't apologize. She smiled the way people do when they think the ending excuses the damage. My fiancé, now, couldn't meet my eyes. He spoke carefully, as if volume alone could injure me. "We didn't plan it this way," he said, pausing after we, testing whether the word hurt. It did. He kept my spare key. I noticed it on his ring, still there, unnecessary but deliberate. My father hovered nearby, pretending to be busy with paperwork. When I asked about my mother's jewelry, he said, "Let's not complicate things." When I asked about the guest list, he said, "It was a small ceremony." When I asked why no one called me, he said nothing at all. At dinner that night, my last in that house, my stepmother corrected the way I held my fork. My stepsister asked if I planned to change my name someday, since as now matched his. She said it lightly, eyes on her plate, like she was discussing weather. They spoke around me, over me, past me. Each pause was intentional. Each glance checked to see if I would react. I didn't. Silence unsettles people who expect noise. I let them grow comfortable in it, believing I was already gone. The moment came quietly, the way truth usually does. I was signing discharge paperwork at the hospital when the clerk slid a form toward me and asked for my emergency contact. I hesitated, pen hovering, and realized there was no one left to write down. Not because I lacked people, but because I had been erased from their sense of responsibility. Later that day, I checked my bank account and saw a withdrawal I hadn't made. Our joint savings. Labeled wedding expenses. That was the first time anger reached clarity. Not heat. Not tears. Precision. I went back through months of messages, calendar invites, shared documents. Patterns emerged once I stopped protecting them from my own suspicion. Overlapping dates. Half-truths. Plans that adjusted themselves around my absence. This hadn't happened to me. It had happened without me, on purpose. I sat alone in a borrowed room and understood something simple. They thought my kindness was consent. My silence, Permission. My patience. Weakness. Enough wasn't a scream. It was a decision. I didn't want confrontation. I didn't want apologies rehearsed too late. I wanted distance, leverage, and time. I wanted them to continue exactly as they were, careless, confident, unguarded. That night, I opened my laptop and began undoing the version of me they had relied on surviving forever. I didn't rush. Rushing is how people make mistakes and call them fate. I made lists instead, quiet ones, written in pencil, easy to erase and revise. First, I separated emotion from evidence. Bank statements, property documents, email threads. I downloaded everything before passwords were changed, before stories hardened into lies. I wasn't dramatic about it. I scheduled consultations the way other people schedule coffee. A lawyer on Tuesday. A financial advisor on Thursday. I learned what words mattered: joint assets, unauthorized withdrawal, breach of promise, tenancy rights. I learned which ones didn't. Love, apparently, was not legally binding. I updated my resume and reached out to an old supervisor who still owed me a favor. Quiet competence has a long memory. Within a week, I had a short-term contract lined up, remote, well-paid, temporary enough to keep me mobile. I redirected my mail, froze my credit, changed my emergency contact to myself. Each step felt small, almost boring, which is how I knew it was right. No scenes. No warnings. Just exits. They assumed I was grieving. I was reorganizing. By the time they noticed I wasn't asking for anything anymore, the structures they leaned on, my money, my signatures, my reliability, were already gone. And I hadn't broken a single rule to take them with me. The fallout didn't arrive with sirens. It came in emails marked urgent and phone calls that went unanswered. The wedding glow faded fast when the bank flagged the withdrawal and froze the remaining funds pending review. My name was still on the lease they'd assumed I'd abandon. My signature was still required on accounts they'd grown careless with. I watched from a distance. From a borrowed balcony at dusk, city lights blinking on like witnesses. My lawyer handled the language. I handled the patience. Notices were sent. Deadlines were enforced. Nothing accusatory. Just facts, neatly stacked. My father called once, voice brittle. He asked why things had become so complicated. I let the silence do the explaining. My stepsister posted fewer photos. The hand on her stomach disappeared from view. My ex learned how expensive easy becomes when it stops working. When the settlement finalized, it wasn't dramatic. A wire confirmation. A signed release. Clean lines. No loose ends. I changed my number that evening and slept without the ache I'd mistaken for loyalty. They named the baby after me anyway. I heard it secondhand, months later. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like balance, restored quietly, finally, without asking permission. People reacted the way they always do when consequences arrive uninvited. They rewrote the past to survive the present. My father told relatives he'd been caught in the middle, as if neutrality had ever been accidental. My stepmother said stress caused misunderstandings. My ex told friends he'd been confused, that timing had betrayed us all. No one said my name unless they had to. What changed was tone. Invitations stopped assuming I would come. Requests stopped assuming I would help. In their place grew something thinner, more cautious. Respect, maybe, or fear of paperwork. It's hard to tell the difference once money and accountability enter the room. I lost a family, yes, but not a support system. I lost a fiancé, but not a future. What I gained was harder to explain and impossible to take back. Proof that my presence had value only when it was guaranteed. Once removed, the imbalance showed itself clearly. That's why this matters. Not because of revenge, or romance, or blood ties gone wrong, but because many people are taught to disappear quietly and call it love. To absorb damage and label it patience. This is what happens when someone stops doing that. The world doesn't end. It simply rearranges itself, around the space you finally claim as yours. I don't think about them often now. Healing, I learned, isn't forgetting. It's remembering without recoil. The past sits where it belongs, behind me, no longer steering. I wake up in a place I chose, to work that pays me for my mind instead of my compliance. My days are quieter. My sleep is deeper. No one mistakes my silence for availability anymore. I used to believe love required endurance. That loyalty meant staying even when the ground beneath you kept moving. I know better now. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors you decide when to open. I've opened a few. I've closed many more. Both feel honest. Sometimes I imagine the child growing up with my name, carrying it like a shadow they didn't choose. I hope it becomes something kinder in their mouth than it ever was in mine. Names don't inherit destiny. People do. The future isn't dramatic. It's deliberate. A longer horizon. Plans that don't need witnesses to be real. I move forward without announcing it, without asking permission, without explaining the cost of my absence. They replaced me once, while I was unconscious. Now I replace myself every day, with someone they will never have access to again.